You ever notice how quiet the world gets when you're drowning? Not a whisper, not a hand, just silence dressed in pretty smiles that vanished the second your luck ran out. Look, beauty is easy when the sun's shining. Anyone can glow under good lighting. But real beauty? That shows up in the dark, in the hospital waiting room at 3 a.m., in the voicemail you didn't expect to hear back, in the friend who sits with you while you fall apart. No advice, no judgment, just presence. Here's the thing, faces fade, trends shift, filters lie. But loyalty? That's carved in bone. And brother, if you've been left behind by people who swore they'd never leave, this truth is your anchor. The most beautiful face isn't the one in the mirror. It's the one that turns toward you when everyone else turns away. You ever walked into a room and felt like you didn't belong because you weren't polished enough, bright enough? Look, we've been sold a lie. A beautiful, airbrushed, carefully curated lie that says your worth is measured in symmetry, skin tone, and how well you fit inside someone else's idea of perfect. But here's the unpolished truth. Appearances are costumes. And costumes fall off the moment real life storms in. I've seen it. I've lived it. Back when I was coming up, I watched men and women chase validation like it was oxygen, fixing their hair, tightening their clothes, rehearsing their smiles, all to be seen, to be chosen, to be wanted. And for a while, it worked. Parties, praise, attention. But then came the layoffs, the breakups, the hospital calls, and suddenly, those same admirers, gone. Vanished like smoke. Not because they were evil, just because they were never real. They loved the version of you that reflected well on them, not the one who needed help getting off the floor. That's the trap of looks. They're transactional. You're celebrated as long as you're convenient, as long as you're winning, as long as your pain doesn't interrupt their peace. But real beauty? It doesn't flinch when your world cracks open. It leans in. And yeah, society trains us to confuse attraction with affection. We scroll through feeds of flawless faces, sculpted bodies, curated joy, and we start believing that if we just look like that, we'd finally be loved. But love built on aesthetics is a house on sand. One wave of hardship, and it's gone. I remember a brother once told me, "Man, I lost everything. My job, my apartment, even my confidence. And the woman who said she loved my smile. She couldn't even look at me when I cried. That's not love. That's decoration. And you deserve more than to be someone's accessory." Real talk, your face will change. Your body will age. Your hair will thin. But your character? That's the only thing that deepens with time. And the people who truly see you, they don't care about your highlight. They care about your heart. The world claps for appearances, but applause dies fast when life gets hard. Because applause doesn't pay your rent, doesn't sit with you in grief, doesn't answer your 3 a.m. call when you're shaking and can't breathe. I've been there, standing in the wreckage of a dream, wondering who'd still show up if I wasn't on. And let me tell you, the ones who did, they didn't care about my suit. They cared that I was still standing. Barely, but standing. Here's what they won't tell you. Beauty built on looks is a performance, and performances end. But loyalty? That's a promise. Not spoken in grand declarations, but proven in quiet consistency, in texts that say, checking in rides across town just to sit with you, in remembering how you take your coffee when you've forgotten yourself. And brother, if you've been discarded the moment you stop shining, that wasn't rejection. That was revelation. They never loved you. They loved the idea of you, the version that made them feel good, look good, win. But your real people, they love the version that's tired, messy, uncertain. The one who stumbles, the one who needs. Because real beauty isn't about never falling. It's about who kneels down to help you rise. So stop measuring your worth by mirrors or metrics or who follows you online. Start measuring it by who stays. Because in the end, no one's eulogy says they had perfect skin. They say they showed up. They stayed. They loved without conditions. And that is the only beauty that lasts. You don't need to be flawless. You just need to be faithful to yourself and to the few who've proven they're faithful to you. The rest, just noise, just glitter, just temporary light. But loyalty, that's the kind of beauty that outlives time. You ever notice how easy it is to love someone when they're winning? When their bank account's full, their smile's bright, their life's a highlight reel? But real beauty, true beauty, doesn't reveal itself in victory. It shows up in the quiet years, in the slow fade, in the moments when the applause has stopped and all that's left is you, and the person who still sees you. Look, time doesn't flatter, it strips. It peels away the makeup, the muscle, the charm, the curated persona, and what's left beneath. That's where you find the truth. Not in the first impression, but in the thousandth. Not in the grand gesture, but in the daily choice to stay. I've watched friendships dissolve the moment one person stopped being useful. Careers shift, priorities change, and suddenly the bond that felt unbreakable, brittle as old glass. But I've also seen the opposite. A woman sitting beside her husband for 20 years as his mind faded, holding his hand like it was still the first time. No fanfare. No audience. Just love, weathered and worn, but unshaken. That's the test of time. It doesn't ask, "Are you beautiful?" It asks, "Are you there?" And here's the unpolished truth. Youth is loud, but loyalty is quiet. We chase the glow of newness, the spark in someone's eyes when they first meet us. But we forget that real connection is built in the dull, ordinary hours. The laundry days. The silent drives. The nights when you're too tired to talk, but you still share the same couch. I know this hurts, because you've probably given your best to people who left the second you weren't enough anymore. Maybe you aged. Maybe you failed. Maybe you just stopped being fun. And their absence cut deep, not because you needed them, but because you thought they saw you. But time reveals what attention conceals. A face can captivate for a season. A heart that can anchor you for a lifetime. Real talk. The world celebrates beginnings. First dates, fresh starts, new faces. But who celebrates the 15th year of showing up? The decade of choosing each other, even when it's hard, even when you're tired, even when you've seen each other at your worst and stayed anyway. That's where real beauty lives. Not in the flawless skin of 25, but in the laugh lines of 50 that say, "We've cried together and we're still here." I remember an old man once told me, "Son, my wife's hair's gray now, her hands are rough, and she forgets where she put the keys. But when she walks into a room, my chest still tightens. Not because she's perfect, but because she's mine. Through every storm, every stumble, every silence, she never let go." That's not romance. That's reverence. And brother, if you're waiting for someone to love you only when you're polished, you'll always feel alone. Because real love doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to be present. Time doesn't steal beauty, it refines it. Like a river smoothing stone, it washes away the superficial until only what matters remains: trust, patience, shared history, quiet understanding. You won't remember who called you handsome at a party, but you'll never forget who held your hand in the ER. You won't recall the compliments from strangers, but you'll carry forever the voice that whispered, "I'm not going anywhere," when you were sure you'd been abandoned. That's the legacy of time-tested love. It doesn't shout, it endures. So stop chasing the temporary glow of admiration. Start investing in the slow burn of loyalty, because real beauty stands when time steals the shine from your face. Not because it's blind to your changes, but because it sees through them, straight to your soul. And in a world obsessed with forever young, the most radical act of love is choosing to grow old together. Wrinkles, scars, silence, and all. That's not just beautiful, that's sacred. You ever been so low you couldn't even form the words to ask for help? Just sat there, hollowed out, staring at your phone like it might magically know you're drowning? And then, ring, not a text, not a meme, not a "hey, how you doing?" That expects a lie in return, but a voice. Real, warm, urgent, "I'm coming over." That's not just kindness. That's salvation. Look, when your world collapses, you don't need a perfect face. You need a true one. You don't need someone who looks good beside you at a party. You need someone who shows up when there's no party left. No music, no laughter, just you on the floor, trying to remember how to breathe. And here's the raw truth they won't put on a greeting card. Most people don't know what to do with your pain, so they disappear. Not out of malice, just fear. Your brokenness reminds them of their own fragility, so they scroll past. Send a heart emoji. Say, "Let me know if you need anything," knowing you never will, because asking feels like burdening them. But the one who answers, they don't wait for an invitation. They hear the silence in your voice and show up anyway. I've been there. Knees on cold tile, phone in hand, too ashamed to call, too desperate not to. And the moment that voice said, "I'm outside," something in me unclenched, not because my problems vanished, but because I wasn't alone in them anymore. That's the power of a loyal voice. It doesn't fix you. It frees you from the lie that you have to carry everything by yourself. Real talk, beauty fades in the dark. But a voice cuts through the black like a lighthouse. It doesn't need to be poetic, doesn't need to have all the answers. Sometimes it just says, "Me too," and that's enough to keep you from jumping. I remember a young man once told me he almost didn't make it through the night until his old friend, someone he hadn't spoken to in months, called out of nowhere and said, "I had a feeling." "You good?" He wasn't. But that call? It tethered him to this world. That's not coincidence. That's connection. And brother, if you've been waiting for someone to notice you're hurting, stop. Not everyone will, but the ones who matter, they won't just notice, they'll act. Because true beauty isn't passive. It doesn't admire from a distance. It steps into the mess with you. You see, a smile can light a room, but a voice can pull you out of the abyss. A pretty face might turn heads, but a faithful voice turns fates. And in your darkest hour, you won't remember who had the whitest teeth or the sharpest jawline. You'll remember who answered when you whispered, "I can't do this anymore." That voice becomes your anchor, your compass, your proof that you still matter even when you feel invisible. Here's the thing, they don't teach you. Loyalty isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet "I'm here" at 4 a.m. Sometimes it's sitting in silence with you for an hour, saying nothing, because words would cheapen the moment. Sometimes it's just breathing the same air, so you know you're not alone in your pain. And yeah, sometimes that voice cracks. Sometimes it's tired too, but it still shows up. That's the difference between decoration and devotion. One looks good in photos. The other saves your life in the shadows. So don't waste your heart chasing people who only love you when you're easy to love. Chase the ones who love you when you're hard to be around, when you're raw, messy, unpredictable. Because when your world collapses, the truest beauty is the one that answers your call, not with solutions, not with judgment, but with presence. And presence, real, unwavering, no conditions. Presence is the rarest form of love on this earth. It doesn't need filters. It doesn't need an audience. It just needs you to be human. And in that humanity, in that shared vulnerability, you find the only beauty that ever truly saves. The voice that says, "I'm here," when everyone else has already turned away. You ever stood in a crowd and still felt completely alone, surrounded by people who know your name, your story, your smile, but not your silence? That's the difference between popularity and loyalty. One fills your feed, the other fills your soul. Look, 1,000 admirers will cheer when you win, but only one loyal heart will carry you when you lose. And here's the unpolished truth: loyalty isn't flashy. It doesn't trend. It doesn't post. It shows up in the rain with groceries because it remembered you were out of milk. It calls just to hear your voice, not because it wants something, but because it misses you. It defends your name when you're not in the room, not for credit, but because your dignity matters to them. I've seen men with entourages vanish the second their bank account dipped. Friends who only texted when they needed a favor. Lovers who loved the idea of you, but couldn't handle the reality. But I've also seen the quiet ones, the ones who never made a scene, sit with a brother through chemo, job loss, divorce, not because they had to, but because they chose to. That's the power of loyalty. It doesn't announce itself, it acts. Real talk, admiration is easy, loyalty is costly. Admiration costs nothing but a like, a comment, a nod. Loyalty? It costs time, energy, emotional risk. Sometimes your reputation, because standing by someone when they're falling out of favor, that makes you a target too. But that's where real strength lives. Not in the spotlight, but in the shadows where no one's watching. I remember a mentor once told me, "Son, don't count your friends by how many show up to your party. Count them by how many show up to your funeral." Harsh? Maybe. True? Absolutely. Because loyalty isn't tested in celebration, it's forged in crisis. And brother, if you've been burned by people who left the moment things got hard, don't let that harden you. Let it clarify you. Let it teach you to stop valuing volume and start valuing veracity. A loyal heart is more powerful than 1,000 admirers because it gives you something no crowd ever can: safety. When you know someone's got your back, you walk taller. You take risks. You speak truth. You heal louder. Because you're not alone in the arena. And in a world that treats relationships like transactions, what can you do for me? Loyalty is revolutionary. It says, "I'm with you, not because of what you give, but because of who you are." That kind of love disarms fear. It tells your nervous system you're not on your own, and that changes everything. Here's the thing: loyalty doesn't demand perfection, it offers grace. It sees you stumble, and instead of walking away, it says, "Let's figure this out together." And yeah, sometimes loyalty means hard conversations, calling you out when you're wrong, holding you accountable, but it does it with you, not against you. That's the mark of real love. It won't let you self-destruct, but it won't abandon you while you're trying to rebuild. So stop chasing the applause of the many. Start honoring the faithfulness of the few. Because when the music stops and the lights go out, you won't care how many people followed you online. You'll care who stayed in the dark with you. A loyal heart doesn't need your spotlight to shine. It shines for you, quietly, consistently, without expectation. And that kind of power, it doesn't just support you, it saves you. It gives you permission to be human flawed, fragile, uncertain, because you know deep in your bones that you won't be discarded for it. That's not just friendship, that's sanctuary. So protect your loyal ones. Cherish them. Don't take their presence for granted. Because in a world of fair weather fans, a loyal heart is the rarest, most powerful form of beauty there is. And once you've known it, you'll never settle for anything less. You ever looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back? Not because your face changed, but because your eyes looked empty. Like you'd polished the outside so long, you forgot to feed the inside? Look, a mirror shows your face. But your soul? That only reflects in your choices. And here's the unpolished truth. You can spend your whole life curating an image perfect hair, sharp clothes, the right words, and still feel hollow, because no amount of external shine can fill an internal void. I've met people with magazine cover looks who couldn't hold a real conversation without checking their phone. People with flawless skin but brittle hearts. Charming smiles that never reach their eyes. And I've met others, wrinkled, tired, ordinary looking, who radiated a warmth that made you feel seen, not just observed. That's the difference between surface and substance. One catches light. The other is light. Real talk, your reflection means nothing if your heart reflects emptiness. You can have the most symmetrical features on the planet, but if your soul's out of focus, if you're disconnected from your values, your truth, your humanity, then every compliment you receive will feel like a lie. Because deep down, you know, beauty without integrity is just performance. And brother, if you've ever felt like an imposter in your own life, like you're playing a role but losing yourself in the script, you're not alone. We've all worn masks to fit in, to be accepted, to avoid rejection. But masks suffocate, and the longer you wear them, the harder it is to remember who you really are beneath the paint. I remember a young woman once told me, I got everything I thought I wanted, followers, fame, a perfect relationship on Instagram. But I cried myself to sleep every night because I felt like a ghost in my own life. She wasn't broken, she was disconnected from herself. And that's the real crisis of our time. We're obsessed with how we look to others, but we've lost touch with how we feel to ourselves. Your soul doesn't care about your jawline. It cares about your honesty, your courage, your willingness to show up as you are, not as you think you should be. Here's the thing. When you stop performing, something miraculous happens. People don't leave. The right ones lean in, because authenticity is magnetic. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. And real is rare. So ask yourself, when no one's watching, who are you? When the lights go out and the filters come off, what remains? That's your true reflection, not the one in the glass, but the one in your actions. The way you treat the waiter, the way you speak about someone when they're not in the room, the way you respond when you're hurt. Do you lash out or do you seek understanding? That's your soul's mirror. And if it's cloudy, don't blame your face. Clean your heart. Reconnect with your values. Apologize when you're wrong. Sit with your pain instead of numbing it. Choose kindness even when it costs you. Because beauty that comes from alignment between who you are and how you live is the only kind that lasts. It doesn't fade with age. It deepens. You won't remember the compliments about your cheekbones, but you'll carry forever the peace that comes from knowing you lived with integrity. So stop staring at the surface. Start tending to the source. Your soul isn't a decoration, it's your compass. And when it's clear, when it reflects truth, compassion, and courage, you won't need a mirror to know you're beautiful. You'll feel it in your bones. Because real beauty isn't something you have, it's something you are. And the world doesn't need another perfect face. It needs more people brave enough to be real. So drop the mask, face yourself, and let your soul finally shine through. That's not just beauty, that's freedom. You ever watch someone crumble the moment they stop being perfect? Not because they failed, but because everyone around them only loved the illusion. Look, perfection is a prison, and we've all been its willing inmates, smoothing our edges, editing our emotions, rehearsing our responses, just to be accepted. But here's the unpolished truth. Fake perfection doesn't protect you, it isolates you. Because the moment you show a crack, a tear, a doubt, a mistake, the people who only loved your highlight reel, they vanish. Not because you changed, because they never knew you to begin with. I've seen it too many times. The executive who lost his job and suddenly had no friends. The woman whose relationship ended and realized her squad only showed up for brunch, not breakdowns. The artist who stopped posting curated joy and watched her followers drop like stones. They weren't abandoned because they failed. They were abandoned because their relationships were built on performance, not presence. Real talk, perfection impresses people, but loyalty protects souls. And you can't have both. The more you chase flawless, the less room you leave for real connection. Because real connection requires vulnerability. And vulnerability, that's messy. It's crying in public. It's saying, I don't know. It's admitting you messed up badly. But fake perfection demands you hide all that. So you smile through pain. You say, I'm fine when you're drowning. You post victory laps while your insides are collapsing. And what's the cost? Loneliness in a crowd, exhaustion from constant performance, the quiet terror that if people saw the real you, they'd walk away. And sometimes they do. But that's not your failure. That's their limitation. Here's the thing. When you stop pretending, you lose the fair weather fans, but you gain something far more valuable, the people who love you because of your flaws, not in spite of them. I remember a brother once told me, man, I used to think I had to have it all together to be worthy of love. So I never asked for help, never showed weakness. And when I finally broke down, I thought I'd lose everyone. But the ones who stayed, they said, we've been waiting for you to be real. That's the gift of dropping the act. Fake perfection might win you likes, invites, and temporary admiration. But it costs you intimacy. It costs you peace. It costs you the chance to be truly known and truly loved. And brother, if you've been holding your breath, trying to be what everyone expects, breathe. You don't have to be flawless to be worthy. You just have to be honest. Because the people who matter don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be present. And presence means showing up as you are. Tired, confused, imperfect, human. Perfection builds walls. Imperfection builds bridges. So stop editing your pain into palatable posts. Stop shrinking your truth to fit someone else's comfort. The cost of fake perfection is your soul. And that's too high a price to pay. Instead, choose the messy, beautiful truth. You are enough, not because you're flawless, but because you're real. And in a world drowning in filters and facades, realness is the rarest, most revolutionary form of beauty there is. So let them see the cracks. That's where the light gets in, and where your real people find you. Because when the mask falls, love doesn't leave. It finally arrives. You ever sat in a room with someone and said nothing for 20 minutes and still felt more seen than you have in years of small talk? That's not silence. That's sanctuary. Look, we've been taught to measure connection in likes, comments, followers, grand gestures. But the real currency of human bond isn't spoken in words. It's exchanged in presence, in trust, in the quiet courage to show up and stay, even when there's nothing to fix. And here's the unpolished truth. You can't buy real connection. You can't perform it. You can't curate it. It's earned in the unglamorous moments when you choose to listen instead of advising, to sit instead of solving, to simply be instead of impressing. I've watched people spend fortunes on gifts, trips, luxury dinners, trying to buy closeness. But the ones who actually feel loved, they're the ones whose friends showed up with soup when they were sick, who remembered their dog's name, who didn't flinch when they cried in the parking lot. That's the wealth no bank can hold. Real talk. Trust isn't built in speeches. It's built in consistency, in showing up when it's inconvenient, in keeping secrets like sacred ground, in choosing someone's dignity over your gossip. And presence? That's the rarest form of love in a distracted world. Not just physical presence, but full attention. Eyes that don't dart to a phone. Ears that hear the tremor beneath the words. A heart that doesn't rush you through your pain. I remember an elder once told me, "Son, back in my day, we didn't need 3-hour therapy sessions to heal. We had front porches, we sat, we listened, and sometimes just knowing someone was willing to share your silence, that was enough to keep you going." That's the kind of beauty money can't buy. Because in a world obsessed with speed, real connection moves slowly. It doesn't demand answers. It offers space. And brother, if you've been pouring yourself into relationships that leave you emptier than before, ask yourself, are they investing in you or just in the version of you that serves them? Real connection doesn't drain you. It refuels you. It doesn't require you to be on. It invites you to be off, to rest, to unravel, to breathe without performance. Here's the thing. The deepest bonds are often wordless. A hand on your shoulder, a shared glance across a crowded room that says, "I see you." A text that reads, "No need to reply, just wanted you to know I'm thinking of you." That's not romance. That's reverence. And in our hyper-connected age, true presence is revolutionary. Because everyone's talking, but few are listening. Everyone's posting, but few are present. So stop measuring your worth by how many people know your name. Start measuring it by how many people know your soul. The ones who don't need you to explain your grief, because they've memorized the weight of it in your voice. The ones who don't offer solutions, because they understand some wounds aren't meant to be fixed, just witnessed. That's the real currency, not charm, not status, not how well you entertain, but how deeply you see and allow yourself to be seen. And yeah, this kind of connection takes time. It takes risk. It takes the courage to say, "This is me, take it or leave it." But when you find it, it changes everything. Because you finally know you don't have to earn love. You just have to show up as you are, so protect these bonds. Nurture them. Don't take them for granted. In a world trading attention for validation, the people who give you their full presence, without agenda, without expectation, are offering you the most priceless gift there is. And that kind of beauty? It doesn't glitter. It glows from the inside out. Silent, steady, sacred. That's not just connection. That's home. You ever had a moment, sudden, brutal, undeniable, when everything you thought was real shattered? Not with a bang, but with a whisper, "They're not coming back." This wasn't love. I've been alone this whole time. That's not collapse. That's clarity. Look, pain doesn't destroy truth. It strips away the lies so truth can finally walk in, raw, unfiltered, unforgettable. And here's the unpolished truth. You don't awaken in comfort. You awaken in crisis, when the job vanishes, when the relationship ends, when the friend you called family blocks your number. That's when the mask falls, not because you chose to remove it, but because life ripped it off. I've been there. Standing in an empty apartment, boxes half-packed, phone silent, wondering how I mistook admiration for loyalty, attention for love. And in that silence, that's when I saw it. The people who stayed weren't the loudest or the loveliest. They were the quiet ones who showed up with groceries, with silence, with no need for explanation. That's the awakening. Real talk, glamour is a distraction. It keeps you chasing reflections instead of substance. But pain? Pain is a mirror that doesn't lie. It shows you who was real, who was temporary, who was just passing through, using your light to warm themselves before moving on. And yeah, it hurts. Not just the loss, but the realization that you gave your heart to ghosts. But don't curse the pain. Thank it, because before the storm, you saw faces. After the storm, you see souls. I remember a woman once told me, I lost everything, my marriage, my home, my sense of self. But in that rubble, I found my best friend. Not the one who posted with me at parties, but the one who sat with me in the dark, night after night, saying nothing, just being there. I never saw her before. Now I can't imagine life without her. That's the gift of the breakdown. It reveals what was always there, but hidden by noise. And brother, if you're in that season right now, feeling raw, exposed, betrayed, don't numb it. Don't rush to replace what's gone. Sit in the ashes. Let the truth settle. Because this isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your real one. The one where you stop begging for seats at tables that never wanted you. The one where you build your own table and only invite those who've proven they'll stay when the lights go out. Here's the thing, awakening isn't pretty, it's messy. It's crying in the shower. It's deleting numbers without warning. It's finally saying, I deserve better, even when your voice shakes. But in that mess, you find your spine, your boundaries, your self-respect. And you realize the people who left weren't your loss, they were your liberation. Because real beauty doesn't hide in filtered photos or curated captions. It walks in when the glamour fades, in worn sweatpants, tired eyes, and a voice that says, I'm not going anywhere. That's the face you'll remember. Not the one that smiled for the camera, but the one that held your hand when no one was watching. So don't fear the stripping. Embrace it. Every illusion that falls away makes room for what's real to rise. And when truth walks in raw, real, unforgettable, you'll finally know you were never alone. You just hadn't met your real people yet. This pain, it's not your enemy. It's your initiation into a life where loyalty matters more than likes, where presence outweighs perfection, where beauty isn't something you wear, it's something you are, because you've chosen to stand in your truth, even when it cost you everything fake. And that's not just awakening, that's rebirth. You won't remember the compliments, you won't recall the filtered photos or the polished speeches or the grand entrances. But you'll never forget the hand that held yours when you couldn't stand, the voice that whispered, I'm here, when the world went silent. The person who stayed, not for the glory, but for the grief. That's not just memory, that's legacy. Look, real love isn't measured in milestones or social posts or how many years you've been together. It's measured in moments, small, sacred, uncelebrated, where someone chose you over convenience, over comfort, over their own ease. And here's the unpolished truth. You'll forget faces, but never those who stayed when you fell. I've sat with elders at the end of their lives, and not once did they speak of beauty, fame, or fortune. They spoke of the nurse who held their hand during chemo, the friend who drove 3 hours just to sit in silence, the child who called every Sunday, even when they had nothing to say. Those were their treasures, not because they were dramatic, but because they were true. Real talk. Legacy isn't built in spotlights. It's built in shadows, in hospital rooms at midnight, in tear-streaked phone calls, in showing up when no one's watching and no one will ever know. And brother, if you're wondering what kind of mark you'll leave on this world, don't look at your resume. Look at your relationships. Who feels safer because you exist? Who breathes easier knowing you're in their corner? Who carries your voice in their head when they're doubting themselves? That's your legacy. Because real love doesn't announce itself. It lingers. It echoes in the way someone carries themselves years later because you believed in them when no one else did. It lives in the quiet confidence of a young person who says, "My uncle always told me I was enough, and I finally believe him." I remember a man once told me about his father who worked 2 jobs his whole life, never missed a school play, and died with calloused hands and an empty bank account. People called him ordinary, he said, voice breaking, but to me, he was the most beautiful man I ever knew because he never made me feel like a burden. Even when I failed, he looked at me like I was still his miracle. That's the kind of beauty that outlives time. It doesn't fade with age, it deepens with absence. And here's the thing, real love isn't perfect. It stumbles. It apologizes. It shows up late sometimes, but it shows up. It doesn't need you to be winning to be worthy. It loves you in the loss, in the mess, in the middle of your unraveling. That's the love that becomes legend in someone's heart. So stop chasing recognition. Start investing in presence, because decades from now, no one will care how many followers you had. They'll care whether you made them feel seen, whether you stood by them when others walked away, whether your love was a shelter, not a performance. And yeah, this kind of love costs you. It costs your time, your energy, your comfort. But it gives back something no currency can buy, the quiet knowledge that you mattered, not for what you achieved, but for how you loved. So protect your real ones, show up for them, not just in crisis, but in the ordinary. Remember their coffee order, call just to hear their laugh. Defend their name when they're not around. Because that's how legacies are built, not in monuments, but in moments of unwavering faithfulness. And when your time comes, when the lights dim and the noise fades, you won't wish you'd been prettier, richer, or more famous. You'll wish you'd loved deeper, stayed longer, listened more. That's real beauty. That's real love. And that kind of legacy, it doesn't end when you do. It lives in the hearts of those you held, in the courage you gave them, in the quiet certainty that they were never alone. Because love like that doesn't die. It echoes forever. When life breaks you down, and it will, don't look for the prettiest face. Look for the truest heart. Because beauty fades with the light, but loyalty shines brightest in the dark. You felt it, that hollow silence when the crowd disappears and only the real remain. And in that moment, you learn the most sacred truth. Real beauty isn't in symmetry, style, or social validation. It's in the voice that answers your call at 3 a.m. It's in the hand that reaches for yours without needing an explanation. It's in the quiet presence that says, "I'm not going anywhere," not with fanfare, but with faithfulness. The world will always chase surfaces. But your soul, it hungers for substance. So stop measuring love by how it looks and start measuring it by how it shows up. Not in your victories, but in your valleys. Not when you're shining, but when you're shattered. Because when the world forgets your name, it's not beauty that will answer your call, it's love. Raw, unpolished, unwavering love. And that kind of love doesn't need filters. It doesn't need applause. It just needs you to be human and to recognize the humanity in others. So honor your loyal ones. Cherish them. Don't take their presence for granted. And if you've been left behind by people who only loved your highlight reel, let it hurt. Then let it teach you. Because you weren't abandoned. You were refined. The illusions fell away so the truth could finally breathe. And now you know, the most beautiful face isn't the one in the mirror. It's the one that turns toward you when everyone else turns away. That's not just love, that's legacy. So live in a way that becomes someone else's anchor. Show up. Stay. Love without conditions. Because in the end, you won't be remembered for how you looked, but for how you loved. And that is true beauty.